Good evening, everybody. This is June 13th, and this is day 9 of 37 conversations. I want to have a conversation tonight about hateful imagery. I changed the order in which I was going to do some of these conversations because of a post that I made yesterday. So I made a post last night speaking about and just kind of expressing some of my frustration as it relates to the anti-lynching legislation that just died in the Senate this week. And much like this series, I've received a lot of feedback on the conversations and how people have been utilizing the conversations to have conversations with, people around them, people they care about, friends, family, and so on. But I've also received some feedback that wasn't so, pleasant or nice. I kind of surprisingly honest. I didn't think that I would get some negative, the type of negative feedback that I have received regarding, just these conversations that I'm kind of encouraging my friends to have around race. And at the request of some of the people who have been tuning into the series, people had asked about, making my profile public so it can be shared or they can download the link or whatever the case may be. And so I did that. So, I've been receiving feedback from people I don't even know, people, saying positive things, people saying negative things. And last night I made a post regarding, like I mentioned just a second ago, the anti-lynching legislation that died in the Senate this week. I posted pictures of African-American people being lynched in those particular pictures with, white community members just standing around, smiling, gloating, whatever the case may be, sometimes even children. And also white people were lynched in the South and then throughout this country as well. When lynching was, more, prominent, if you will, in society. But those particular pictures were of black people. And I received a message from someone that was like, that's hateful. That's hateful imagery. And, I'm thinking to myself, what exactly, I don't know the context in which that they were speaking. So I was curious as to what they meant. And she gave me the impression that I was trying to weaponize those pictures of lynching to, create a narrative or to create some sort of to weaponize it, if you will, and use it to like cause people that either have seen that to hate white people or something like that, and that's not the case. And while I do understand, I mean, there are many people of color that don't like the videos of unarmed motorists or unarmed people that are being that have happened to lose their lives at the hands of the police to be televised or shown. I actually agree with Van Jones in the sense that that those things do need to make people uncomfortable. You do need to show that. It's a part of history, and even that in the moment, even for instance, even the George Floyd, video of his murder and such, that really happened. It needs, but for sometimes some of that imagery and some of those pictures in those videos, people wouldn't really get the gravity of the situation or how significant it is, right? So, I disagreed with her, my post regarding those lynching pictures. I didn't think that was hateful imagery. Another comment that someone made, I was very frustrated about that as well, but it was civil discourse. There wasn't any, it didn't get crazy or anything like that. But, it makes me to think that, the gravity of the situation, I feel there is a population of people that out there that don't get it. So I wanted to talk about hateful imagery in society later on, but it made me want to do it now. Because I was like, I asked that initial woman, I said, so what do you think about Confederate, representations that exist in our, throughout our country? And she's like, I don't have a problem with that. I'm like, all right, got it. So that was enough that I needed to know. I needed to definitely, it inspired me to have this conversation sooner or later. So I'm going to talk to y'all about right now and today about images of hate. This is my opinion. Again, I have to reiterate, because some of the comments that I've gotten from people and such, I'm not the voice for black people. I'm not the voice for all people of color. This is a conversation, and I'm inspiring people to have similar conversations with people around them. So, when I think about hateful imagery, that I think that we have normalized in this country, let's talk about the Confederate flag. I live in downtown Tampa. and I have to hit 275 east and then go down I-4 south to go to where my office is, which is just south of Brandon here. And I drive by at the junction of 275 and I-4, what is the second largest Confederate flag in the world. The second largest. And, it's, when I'm going to my office, because of course we're working from home in these times of coronavirus, when I'm going to my office, I begin and end my day seeing that, and you can't help but to feel some type of way about that. The Confederate flag, there's no need to even go to even, belabor that point. We all know what it represents. It represents the Confederacy, a nation that broke away from the United States. I mean, let's just leave the racist aspect of it alone, right? Let's just talk about the facts that broke away from the United States and created their own country, seceded from the Union, rebels, right? And that's still flying. It's still celebrated. And for what reasons? It's, actually, I think I'll touch on that in a little bit, actually, my thoughts about that. But it's harmful and it's hurtful and it really is oppressive to many people. As I mentioned, I'm getting, I start and end my day seeing that big flag, the second largest in the world. You can Google it and look it up. The Confederate flag, that particular flag is down right now because of the owners of that property are concerned about protesters and rioters, bringing it down and burning it, which, I would not condone that per se, but I would not be upset if that flag didn't go back up again. And I've also seen times in which, you've got people that talk about, you see the Confederate flag on so much clothing, keychains, grills on big 18-wheelers, mud flaps, I've seen baby clothing that's made out of the Confederate flag or the imagery of the Confederate flag, hats. I mean, you get what I'm saying. Just on and on and on. It just blows my mind. And this is a conversation that I'm so passionate about, and I just have I'm trying to collect my thoughts in here and talking with you all about it. And it bothers me so much. It bothers me so much. I've even seen times in which the Confederate flag is weaponized. So I went to the University of Florida, and I was actually myself. I'm in a historically black fraternity, Phi Beta Sigma, and one of the Panhellenic fraternities on campus was called the Kappa Alpha Order, and they were a Panhellenic Council fraternity, predominantly white students and such. And they would fly the battle flag. They would fly the Confederate flag in front of their house on Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, and we can have a whole conversation about racism in fraternities or predominantly white fraternities, especially racism in fraternities in the South, right? But, I've seen instances in which that was weaponized. So, you may have your people that say, it just displays Southern pride. It displays, my pride for the South and so on and so forth. I would venture to encourage those individuals to find other ways to display display that pride. Let's talk about Confederate monuments, right? So, there are so many, it's hot in the news right now. These hateful images, Confederate monuments being torn down, not even Confederate monuments of Christopher Columbus. And, people are feeling some type of way about it. You have a population of people out there that are excited and they're happy because that's something that just, restores so much, hurt and pain and suffering. And there are others who are just really bothered because they're thinking that there's something being robbed of them, like that their history is being erased. I think there's a stark difference between erasing history and immortalizing it and admiring it. There could be an argument for, placing those monuments in history in museums or historical sites or whatever the case may be. Fine, so be it. But I ultimately, I would really wonder. I would love to be a fly on the wall, right, or on the shoulder of a family, of a white family, looking at a Confederate monument or a statue of Jefferson Davis, right, and what that conversation is like with their children. Because if my father and I were to walk by that and I was an adolescent or even as a grown adult and we looked at that, we would, talk about, the significance of who that individual was. But then on the same token, it would also be shared with me that that individual owned slaves, people as property. So, it really surprises me, and that goes back to our education conversation, which was day one of this series. I think that, if you want to give people the benefit of the doubt, they may not know their history because it was not taught to them. But that is a conversation and a discussion that is passed down from generations to generations to generations within people of color's family lineage. And, the hateful imagery that exists in society is just one element of oppression and marginalization that we experience as people of color in this country. Just one. And, it's very little that could be done about that per se. I almost wonder how, those monuments were even constructed and what that dedication ceremony was like. Now understanding and, speaking in totality, sure. Prior to the Civil War, these were, leaders and generals and, so on and so forth that represented the United States in armed engagements, with other nations or, and so on. But to me, that goes out the window when the Civil War happens. That goes out the window when those individuals chose, to take, actions to secede, be traitors, treason, and fight for bondage. Ultimately, I think that at that point in time, those individuals are immortalized in a different way, and I think that narrative changes. Personally, military bases, right? There are military bases in this country that are named after Confederate leaders. My father, as y'all talked, y'all didn't talk to him. Excuse me. I talked to him, and we had our conversation about, the conversation that Black parents have with their children about engaging the police. Imagine being a person of color and serving at a military base that's named after a Confederate leader. Schools. Imagine being a third grader going to Robert E. Lee Elementary School. And then the other aspect of it is conceivably a person of color could be attending a school named after someone who owned their ancestors as property. So I wonder, and I just really, I'm challenged with the pushback that's presented when these realities are displayed, right? When these realities are expressed and discussed with, people in the community, and they're thinking that they're being robbed of something because a name is being changed on a school, or, they don't think or they don't understand why it's wrong to have Stonewall Jackson Parkway, for instance. I don't know if a Stonewall Jackson Parkway exists. I'm just, pulling that out of the sky. Or why a statue has to come down. Like I made a comment. I got into a little, not really much actually. I made a comment on I think it was a Time magazine post on Instagram in which it showed a statue of Christopher Columbus being taken down. And I said, my comment on the post was, I hope people understand why this is important and why this must happen. And then someone responded to me, just go ahead and destroy someone else's art. Art? Certainly beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but there's nothing to fantasize or to regale or to celebrate about Christopher Columbus. And for those who don't understand that, once again, it's because they don't know history, and because it wasn't taught to them, and because we have normalized these symbols of hate within our country. We are so quick to denounce other nations, right, for their human rights injustices. But we don't want to come to grips with the way that people have been marginalized and oppressed and killed and murdered and lynched and raped in this country, people of color, since 1619, right? I think that is, if you've been following the series, that's a big theme that we've had talking about, these matters, is because we haven't come to grips with these things. We haven't talked about these things. I have white counterparts that say things to me like, well, why are Black people still complaining about this stuff? Why, it happened. Why can't we get over it? Because we are celebrating and immortalizing and idolizing in some respects, I think, by, having schools named, bases named, streets named, have statues of individuals who were oppressors and owned humans as property, and were condoned the murder of individuals because of the color of their skin. So, this subject is it's just so deep, and it's so frustrating for me to even have to, that this is even a topic of discussion, but it's a necessary topic of discussion. I mean, it's so hypocrites, right? We have the whole conversation about hypocrisy and contradictions and ironies and such. Few people probably realize that when Malcolm X was alive, he was, I don't know if campaigning is a correct word, but he called out the United States on their hypocrisy. Let me just put it to you that way. He essentially was speaking about how the UN should go after the United States for human rights violations because how black people were being treated in this country. But yet the United States was denouncing South Africa because of apartheid. Right. But in the meantime, in our own country, our own nation, the United States had, segregation in the South. There were lynchings, murders, injustices for people of color in this country. And, it's just that consistent behavior, just not accepting, but just simply not coming to grips with owning our part of the mess, right? So there's a leadership book that I read called Leadership on the Line. And part of it, one aspect of that book is it talks about owning your part of the mess. The United States has not owned their part of the mess as it relates to the oppression that has happened and that has been systemically thrust upon people of color in this country. That's ultimately what, my thoughts are about that. NASCAR, y'all probably just saw in the news, NASCAR just, said that the Confederate flag can't be flown at any other races anymore. NASCAR can't have imagery that reflects the Confederate flag and such. And, I thought NASCAR had this debate years ago and it was already not allowed. But at any rate, there was a NASCAR driver that said, I will quit the race. I will quit the sport, because we are trying to appease one population while also hurting another. That guy just doesn't get it. The guy doesn't get it. And, if someone feels as if, having the Confederate flag or having a monument dedicated to someone like Christopher Columbus or Robert E. Lee or Jefferson Davis or, Stonewall Jackson or, those Confederate leaders helps them to display their Southern pride, I would encourage them to take an audit of their morals and values, simply put, because, even if someone didn't understand, really, how can you not know about the institution of slavery that existed in the Southern United States? There's no way not to. And then, I think there are plenty of other ways for people to display their Southern pride. I mean, in the way that people speak, in the way the vernacular, the accents, the food that's cooked in the South, the music, the films, the hobbies, the activities. There's plenty of other ways that people can display Southern pride than to want a statue of a Confederate leader in the middle of a downtown square or something like that. And also, it actually worries me, and it's also kind of scary because it gives me the impression that those individuals would maintain the ideals of the Confederacy had the South won the Civil War. I mean, let's think about that for a moment, right? So there are so many other ways in my perspective that Southern pride can be displayed and celebrated beyond displaying those images of hate. So let's talk about Nazi Germany for a second, right? So, I had a great, I got to give a shout out to Emily Woods. Love you very much. I have had a lot of conversations with Emily about, these conversations that I'm going to be having this month and that I've had thus far. And so many more conversations that aren't even going to fit in the 37 conversations, right? And I've lived in Germany. So I lived in Germany. My father was stationed at Spangdahlem Air Base over in Germany. Lived there for 5 years. And I traveled all throughout Europe. We traveled all throughout Europe, met many different types of people and such. It was great. But specifically speaking about Germany, though, and I can't speak in absolutes because nothing is, 100%, right? I never once saw an East German flag flying somewhere or a West German flag flying somewhere. It was always the German flag. It was the German flag. And a significant irony that I didn't even bring up, right, in my hypocrisies, contradictions, and ironies conversation from the other night is the fact that, so the same people that are so adamant about, the naming of schools and the naming of streets after these Confederate leaders and these statues and, displaying the Confederate flag and not thinking it's wrong are the same individuals who have so much nationalism. They have so much pride for the United States, right? But yet we're displaying things that displays separatism and displays rebellion and celebrates rebellion and celebrates separatism. So, I think Germany is a great example of that. Like, I've lived there, I've been there. And let's not even talk about concentration camps, right? So concentration camps are essentially, that's hallowed ground throughout Europe. Whether you've been to Auschwitz, in Poland or Dachau, in Munich, in Bergen-Belsen, where Anne Frank died. There are so many concentration camps that are immortalized as hallowed ground and as essentially museums to remember that history, to come to terms with it and to remember it so it doesn't happen again, right? Why don't we do that in the United States with plantations? Plantations are so romanticized in the United States, it blows my mind. Like, people are getting married at plantations. There are, corporate retreats that take place at plantations. There are meetings that take place at plantations. Bed and breakfasts are on the grounds of plantations. I don't understand that. I don't. When I lived in Gainesville, Florida, I lived outside of a place called Hale Plantation in Gainesville. And I only referred to it as Hale. I never called it Hale Plantation. Just the connotation, the association with the plantation, in my opinion, it's hurtful, harmful, disgusting, demeaning. And I'm not trying to make, people are going to, there's a lot of comments that people might make about this or might put in the comments when I post this on the page and so on. I'm not making a moral equivalency between Nazi Germany and slavery or the American South and Nazi Germany. Oppression, marginalization, murder, rape. Yeah, those things definitely happen. War, that stuff's real. I mean, but I'm just using that as an example. To me, the principle is similar, right? No one would tell a Jewish person to not take offense to the Nazi flag. So when someone is, for instance, when, someone is saying, oh, well, you're, someone that's not a person of color, right, is telling someone that's black or another person of color or someone who's white who also finds a Confederate flag offensive, how can you tell someone that? How can you tell someone that something that is offensive to them isn't offensive? It doesn't make sense. It's a contradiction. It's a hypocrisy. It's an irony, and we had that conversation the other evening. So I think that this debate and this conversation that's happening and all that's taking place as it relates to these monuments and these representations that are being taken down, schools are being, they're having buildings renamed, and that's a good start. Certainly, it's a good start, and it's a very necessary action that needs to happen and take place. Certainly, there's still we still need to understand the other elements and aspects of society in which marginalization and suppression and oppression, is taking place. Because this is all has to do with Black Lives Matter, right? Because I feel when I'm driving to and from my office and I'm driving by that second largest Confederate flag on the planet, that my life doesn't matter, because that flag flew over a country that was killing Black people, that was enslaving Black people, that was purchasing Black people as property. So, I think it's important, right? It's important to have these conversations with people. It's important to have these conversations with people that don't look like you, because I think that's the only manner in which we will understand certainly someone's struggle in their true beliefs and how hurtful or harmful these images are to people. I mean, I don't know. I've talked to anti-protesters about this Black Lives Matter movement too on the street, when protesting or walking to a protest or whatever the case may be. And, I appreciate the questions like, why is this movement important? Why is this movement necessary? I'll die for this. I would die for this movement. What would you die for? Right? And I think it's important for people to understand that, not to mention the scores and scores and scores and scores of generations that will never exist on this earth because they were killed, because they were murdered, because they were in bondage, because they were assassinated, because they were killed by a police officer on the street, because they were killed by someone in a neighborhood because they were a person of color and they look suspicious. That's the reason why this is important. That's the reason why. And it's always so interesting that people who don't get the gravity of this movement are people who've never protested something themselves because they haven't had to. So, this hateful imagery, and there's probably so much more I can talk about, publications, words that people post online, words that people, use out of their mouth and that they say to people. Like, there's so much more. There's so much more. But those ones I wanted to talk about, plantations, monuments, Confederate flag, school names, military base names, street names. Those are intentional actions that we take that we need to undo. We need to undo and fix those, in my opinion. So, once again, hopefully this is something for you to think about, something to talk about, and hope you have a good night. I'll talk to you tomorrow.